Well, it's a pleasure to see people joining us and filing into the virtual conference room, so to speak. I'm Jeff Rathke, president of the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies at Johns Hopkins University, and it's a great pleasure to have you all with us today. This is the second webinar we're holding today, and the second on a really strategically significant aspect of transatlantic and European security. We spent an hour this morning talking with the head of Germany's so-called Bundesnetzagentur, the energy electricity regulator, as well as voices from German industry and leading economists on the energy transition and the energy security aspect of German policy. And we're really delighted now to switch gears a little bit to the topic of Germany, Lithuania, and security on NATO's eastern flank, another crucially important aspect of the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its attempt to remake the security landscape of Europe. And it's another area where Germany's response is critically important, and we'll get a chance to shed some light on that today. We are really honored to have with us two tremendous contributors to this discussion. I will be moderating, but the stars of the show will be Siemtje Möller, who is a member of the German Bundestag, and she is also the Parliamentary State Secretary in the Ministry of Defense, and she joins us from Berlin. Thanks, Madam State Secretary, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody.
And we are equally pleased to have with us Dr. Steve Flanagan, who is an Adjunct Senior Fellow at the RAND Corporation, who has a long history in the analytical sector, in government, as well as on the Hill, if I'm not mistaken, and at many prestigious research and educational institutions. Steve Flanagan, thanks for being with us.
Happy to join you, Jeff.
All right. Now, some of you will have seen that we had an addition to our speaker list. That was the Brigadier General Modestas Petrauskas, Lithuania's defense attaché in Washington. He has had to cancel his participation on very short notice because of an urgent meeting and a change to his schedule that he was unable to change. So we apologize for that, but I think we've got a great lineup for this discussion. So I'm going to start with just one maybe quotation and then turn the floor over to State Secretary Möller for her introductory comments. And this is from the NATO summit declaration, the Madrid summit, which took place this past summer, just a couple of months ago. From paragraph 9 of the summit declaration, allies have committed to deploy additional, robust, in-place, combat-ready forces on our eastern flank, to be scaled up from the existing battle groups to brigade-sized units when and where required, underpinned by credible, rapidly available reinforcements, prepositioned equipment, and enhanced command and control. That's a very long sentence, the kind you tend to find in a NATO document, but I think it encapsulates the way that the NATO alliance is trying to shift to defense on its eastern flank, and I look forward to the discussion today. State Secretary Möller, the floor is yours for introductory observations.
Thank you very much. I was supposed to have more global, or have introductory remarks on a more global level. So if you allow, I would stick to it, and then later on we will discuss in detail what we do in Lithuania, because we are the framework nation for the Enhanced Forward Presence battle group that is stationed and situated in Lithuania. And we committed what we promised with the Madrid summit, but I'm sure that we will go into detail later on. So first of all, thank you very much for having me and for having, for sure, a detailed and deep discussion later on. I know that it's a second attempt that we commit today, because the first one I had to take care of my sick fallen child. So thank you very much for being so for sticking to the idea of having a panel with me. Thank you. Thanks again. So, and as Christmas is approaching, I would really prefer to have a discussion with a more happy focus, but unfortunately we have Russia's full-fledged invasion of Ukraine, and of course we have the Western world and especially Ukraine in answer to this invasion. And it's a ruthless violation of international law and draws our attention to the East, where brave Ukrainian men and women have been fighting for their freedoms since February and will continue to do so throughout this winter and the upcoming months. This is for sure. Maybe it's even for the whole next year, or maybe even further on. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian population suffers from Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure, the lack of gas, heating, and water. We have very heartbreaking images from Ukraine, and it's breathtaking how fierce the Ukrainian people fight against the Russian invasion. The United States, Germany, and the NATO allies, along with partners of NATO, the EU, and beyond, are supporting Ukraine's fight significantly and will continue to do so. At the same time, we are sending clear signals of deterrence towards Russia. An expansion of its aggression into NATO territory will not be tolerated. We will defend every inch of NATO's territory. I'm convinced that the alliance member states' quick reaction after 24th of February were unequivocal and showed how rock solid our alliance cohesion is. And with that, how strong and indispensable NATO is and will be in the future. Looking at the transatlantic bonds in NATO and between our two nations, it is important to state that Germany and Europe as a whole still rely on our biggest and most important ally in the West, which is the United States. But we understand that we must not be over-reliant, not because we do not trust the US to stand in the alliance, but because we have to assume our share of responsibility for peace, freedom, and security in Europe. We understand that the United States have interests around the globe and increasingly need to focus on the Indo-Pacific. And as friends, we have to take this into account and accept these legitimate interests, as well as to follow NATO's principle of fair burden sharing. And therefore, I'm happy to discuss how Germany fulfills or believes to fulfill in the future the fair burden sharing, and how we fulfill what we promised in the Madrid summit. So far as introductory remarks. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Madam State Secretary. Steve, I'd love to turn to you for your thoughts and observations before we go deeper into the subject matter. Why don't I give you the floor now, and then we'll circle back around.
Certainly, thank you. No, I'm happy to. I thought that the State Secretary put it very well as to where Germany is perceived as moving forward in responding, and the Chancellor's call, although she hadn't yet invoked the term, the Zeitenwende, that seems to be underway in Germany, and that many in, I think, the United States and elsewhere in Europe are watching with great interest, that this is going to be a turning point. It has been a turning point, a historic turning point, not only in German, but as the Chancellor noted in his Foreign Affairs article last week, that it's really a global Zeitenwende, and the whole question of now, how does the Greater West respond to these challenges? Clearly, the US and Germany have been working closely together in both developing NATO's response to the further Russian aggression and supporting Ukraine as leading contributors to both Ukrainian self-defense and also humanitarian assistance. Nevertheless, there are questions that are out there, of course, about how sustainable the Zeitenwende will be. Is Germany fully committed to making good on some of the commitments? And of course, just last week, we saw that there seemed to be a move away from the commitment about achieving the 2.5% of GDP on defense within the next several years, that it might not be achieved until 2025 or beyond. So I'd be interested to hear the State Secretary's comments on that, and whether or not, and that's of course only one indicator of commitment, but of course there is also the special fund that the was announced to enhance investments, the 110 billion fund that was made available to close some of the gaps in the well-documented shortfalls in German armament, personnel, and readiness. So, but I think all of this is a very positive sign, and whether or not these commitments are realized in the next in this next immediate year. I think that the trajectory is certainly very positive, and I think many in the United States, in both in the analytic community and government, are looking forward to continued working with Germany as it takes this larger role in deterrence and defense along NATO's eastern flank. So maybe I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Steve. And that, I think, brings us to this very particular responsibility that Germany has taken on. The State Secretary pointed out that Germany has a view and an aspiration to show greater leadership in European and transatlantic security, and that, I think, brings us to the enhanced forward presence in Lithuania. Germany is the framework nation for the NATO presence in Lithuania, along with Canada in Latvia and the United Kingdom in Estonia. And in that respect, we've had since the 2014 invasion by Russia of Ukraine an enhanced forward presence on the eastern flank, but that is now being strengthened still further as a result of the February 24th invasion of Ukraine. And so I wanted to turn perhaps back to you, State Secretary, to talk a little bit more about the German commitment to Lithuania, what this represents from a national perspective and in a NATO context. We've seen, especially since the Madrid summit, additional German forces, including command elements from German armored units, which then form a kind of permanently positioned headquarters, and then will enable the rapid reinforcement. So could you tell us a little bit more about this deployment and how Germany sees its responsibility with regard to the enhanced forward presence and Lithuania?
Well, thanks very much for the question. First of all, when in 2014 there was the annexation of Crimea, was a response to this annexation that NATO erected the enhanced forward presence battle groups, and one of the framework nations is Germany. Since then, when 2016, they have been stationed, or they have been positioned to the Baltic countries plus Poland, and since then we are present there. The direct answer or direct reaction after the 24th of February was that we said we will send more soldiers to this enhanced forward presence to Lithuania, so that we have more soldiers present on NATO territory as a direct answer, and also, of course, a signal of deterrence to Russia, that they will not be attempted to have a bigger bite in Eastern Europe. And after this, we had the signing of a contract between Lithuania and Germany, that we will have a brigade assigned to Lithuania. So meaning that up to 5,000 soldiers present in the country, but only if needed. We have them deployable, we have them trained with a rotation system, that they are systematically trained in Lithuania, but not all the time present there. We have the brigade element, meaning that they can be, wie sagt man denn, geführt, that they can be led through this element. So we have them directly assigned to Lithuania. We have them deployable, we have them trained, everything as a direct answer to the threat from the east, but also as a direct answer to what we are willing to commit and to fulfill in terms of what we promised to NATO. So this is something very, very clear. It's already in action, it's already operative, and we have it also in the rotation system that we have a lot of troops present in Lithuania. Furthermore, or additionally, we have also troops present in Slovakia. So we are part there also in the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group in Slovakia, present with Patriot systems and some other troop parts. And we have also in the maritime dimension, we have ships training and sailing on the Atlantic and the North Sea, and also on the Baltic Sea. And in the air dimension, we have also Eurofighters controlling and patrolling over Slovakia, also sometimes in Romania, and also in the rotation principle. And we offered this to Poland. They accepted that we will do the air patrolling. So this is something that we know that we have as a big responsibility to our eastern neighbors and also to our eastern partners. Due to history, but also due to the new security environment, which we have to answer to the security environment. We promised to NATO to take, and also to our eastern partners, to take more responsibility, and we stick to this promise and be fulfilled with what I just mentioned, what we do since February. If I may, I would like to answer the question that Stephen mentioned related to the 2% goal that Chancellor Scholz mentioned in his Zeitenwende speech in front of the German Bundestag, along with this 100 billion euro special fund for the Bundeswehr, came a law where we promised to fulfill up to, more than 2% in the future, but we have admitted for 5 years, meaning because we knew that we cannot this year and probably also not the next year spend as much money to meet the 2%. That is why we have it middles or levels over 5 years. This is in our law, and Chancellor Scholz and also Defense Minister Lambrecht, so my boss, everybody is very keen and very alert to meet this goal within the next year, so that we also fulfill this promise which we gave to the Western Alliance.
Thank you very much. If I could follow up on one, you mentioned the rotational presence of the brigade, and without getting into perhaps sensitive timelines and so forth, should we understand correctly that when you talk about the trained and deployable forces of this armored brigade, that they would be able to be present on extremely short notice in Lithuania in the event of a crisis? Is that built into the framework for Germany's increased responsibility in Lithuania?
The short answer, yes.
Okay, and I think we may dig down a little bit more on that, but I'll turn to Steve for thoughts and reactions.
Thank you. Thank you, State Secretary, also for addressing my question. And I misspoke. I said I meant 2% of GDP, not 2.5%. But let me comment on the enhanced forward presence in the German support to Lithuania and leadership of the multinational battalion there. First of all, I think it's easy to forget, as we're talking about Zeitenwende and other things, that if someone had told me in 2009 or 10 that Germany would be leading a multinational battalion in Lithuania, I would have thought that they needed their head examined. But so I think the significance of that move that was made, of course, after the Warsaw Summit and the deployments that began in 2017 was a historic shift, an earlier shift in German defense and security policy that we shouldn't trivialize or forget how significant it was. And of course, with all those deployments of the early enhanced forward presence in the in the Baltics and Poland, there were some bumps along the road. There were difficulties in logistics, clarifying the rules of engagement, but all of those were worked out very carefully. And I think that the German government and others deserve a lot of credit for working with the Lithuanian Armed Forces, the NATO Force Integration Unit in Vilnius, and military personnel from other troop contributing nations that ensured the development of this into an effective element of NATO's enhanced capabilities to under the defense and deterrence of the North Atlantic region. And indeed, as the State Secretary was alluding to, these German units, NATO units are going into these missions, including the additional battalions that have now, the battle groups that have been created after the Madrid summit in Central and Southeastern Europe, are going through demanding training cycles for combat operations to be sure that they're ready to take on these missions in what could be, in fact, a near-term conflict should Russia decide to provoke some kind of action against the Baltics or other states in Central and Eastern Europe. Now, as you noted at the summit in Madrid, and this was a point of contention in the Baltics, that who were, as is well known, would like to have seen a larger presence permanently on the ground in their countries. Madrid made a decision that these battle groups would be increased from the battalion to brigade size when and where required, as you noted, Jeff. But the UK as well as Germany decided that they wouldn't deploy those elements forward in peacetime. But given the well-known challenges in military mobility in the Baltic region, questions had been raised and continue to be raised about whether or not these additional forces could arrive in the region in good time, particularly in the face of a short notice attack. Moreover, the regional leaders, as I said, have been pushing the three Baltic prime ministers met together in Vilnius, in fact, on the eve of the NATO summit, calling for NATO allocating a division able to integrate national and territorial defense forces forward and to deploy a combat-ready brigade forward, supported by various enablers to strengthen the battle groups. And of course, that was not the decision quite made at the Madrid summit. And indeed, Prime Minister Kallas of Estonia has been quite outspoken, saying that she is very concerned about that her country and others are still vulnerable to a short notice attack. But I think, in fairness, that Germany and other allies have been taking steps that the State Secretary alluded to address these concerns under this, what's known as this NATO enhanced vigilance activities and the new NATO force model, so that in fact, for example, we saw in October the German light infantry battalion that is part of the supporting force of the battle group in Lithuania was involved in this exercise that tried to demonstrate how they could, in fact, get their personnel and equipment to Vilnius and to the Lithuania more broadly in good time, and that included other elements of that enhanced vigilance brigade, which is committed, as the State Secretary noted, to up to 5,000 troops being available to the defense of Lithuania in a crisis. So I think all of that is good to see and reassuring, of course, to Baltic partners who I think, not expecting an imminent attack. And since our Lithuanian counterpart couldn't join us, I won't speak for them, but I think that as I hear their concerns, it's not that they fear an imminent attack, but they want to be sure that over the longer term, given that Russia is tied down and has done so badly in its operations in Ukraine, nonetheless, there's a window of opportunity to strengthen defense and deterrence in the Baltic region, and they want to be sure that NATO's taken adequate measures to do so. So I'll stop there.
Okay, well, I'm going to bring in our audience into the conversation shortly. Let me just give you a quick tip. Those of you who have joined us on this webinar, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and please also make my job easier by formulating as precisely and succinctly as you can your question for our panelists, and I'll look forward to getting to those in just a minute. And before we do, though, I wanted perhaps to speak to the Lithuanian aspect of this. Of course, Lithuania has been making its own intensified national efforts, including increased defense spending and acquisition of capabilities. Those include HIMARS rocket systems, Switchblade UAVs, Caesar self-propelled howitzers, and tactical vehicles, among many other things. And so that brings me to maybe to two aspects I'd like to address before we bring in Q&A from our viewers. And so the first is the degree to which Germany is collaborating with Lithuania to incorporate not only its growing presence on the ground, but also the expanded Lithuanian capabilities. Are there, to what degree is that a unified, coordinated effort? And then the second question, which maybe we might turn to first, is, as Steve alluded to, there has been some significant criticism, sometimes even caustic, I might say, from some leaders in Central and Eastern Europe, looking for greater contributions and presence. And so, State Secretary, you work at the interface, in a way, of the politics of this within the German system, but also the more detailed planning that is being done by the Defense Ministry. So, how can you tell us something about how the politics of the demands from Central and Eastern European allies fits in the political military diplomacy that you carry out with Lithuania and with other NATO allies? How do you manage those demands, those concerns? To what degree do you think there's more that needs to be done?
Well, so far I think that we have counterparts also in the ministry. So, for example, in Lithuania, and I met my counterpart in Lithuania, invited him also to Berlin. So I met him twice, and we were discussing a lot and talking a lot about how could we further deepen the cooperation between our both countries. And he was very happy about then also the signing of the MOU between the president and the chancellor, because this was exactly what they wanted, to have a deeper and a broader responsibility, and also guarantee by Germany with the troop presence that are deployable. We hear sometimes a bit different also perspectives from Lithuania, but what we hear from the MOD in Lithuania itself, they are very happy with what we do. The integration process is not that we are situated or positioned in Lithuania and do what we want, is the other way around, that they have the command and our troops are integrated, and also the battle group is integrated in the command structure in Lithuania. So they control what we do there, and we are integrated with what we do on the ground in the Lithuanian military planning process. So this is something, the other way around. It's not that we do and they ask us what we can do. Is the other way around. We are in their command structure. So this maybe is just to clarify how the chain is. And so far, what I learned is that there's a lot of also discussion, also debate, talking between different levels of governments, between the chancellery and the president of Lithuania, between the ministers on the working level. And we're talking about what is the need, what is the threat perception in these countries, and what can we fulfill, or how can we help to reach out to the threat perception, in order also to first primarily to deter Russia, but also to bring a bit ease to the population, so that they feel more secure than they feel at the moment, or than they felt before. So this is back and forth, and then in the end, we have this construction, which is also met in the NATO summit agreement, that we have the brigade, which is assigned to Lithuania, which is deployable on a very short notice to effect. We left this notice to move level and came to notice to effect, which is meaning is not that they have to move within 5 days, they have to be there in 5 days. So this is something different to before. And we have it directly assigned, and they are trained. They know the environment where they have to, where they will be stationed, or they will be positioned, and they know the rules, they know the rituals, they know every maneuvers, they know all the operations, and how to operate on the ground. So this is something that how we wanted to reach the interest and also the needs of Lithuania. And so far what I heard is that they're very happy how we fulfill the promise, because this is also something that is quite German, I believe, that we promise something and then we fulfill it in terms of that. We say we bring more troops to Lithuania. We brought them on short notice. And then also we promised to have a bigger assignment to Lithuania, and also this we fulfilled within a very short time, and we have it already operated.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Q&A from some of our viewers, but first I want to see, Steve, if you want to add anything to the comments we've just heard.
No, I think that what Secretary Möller said is all very reassuring, and I think all of those steps that have been taken are significant. The one thing I would, just to broaden the scope a little bit, though, would be one thing as you talk about the regional response. Of course, this is the German presence in Lithuania is part of a much larger commitment to the defense of Central and Northeastern Europe. And so the whole question of how these various battle groups are working together, including with the U.S. battle group that's in Poland, and developing their operational concepts, and particularly given the importance of the fact that they're an important transit corridor to reinforcement of the Baltics, at least on land, would be through the Suwalki Gap between Lithuania and Belarus and Poland, in that area that could be a critical choke point. And so there's a number of challenges that I think NATO continues to have to address. It is looking at that, certainly from all that I can see on the outside through various exercises and activities. But that whole question of enhanced integration under these enhanced vigilance operations and the development of this new NATO force model, which would call for a much larger, actually the replacement of the NATO response force, which are a much larger force that we could talk about in more detail. But in any event, I think all of that comes together in achieving these goals of enhancing defense and deterrence of not only the Baltics, but the whole wider region of Northeastern Europe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And thanks for addressing the Suwalki point.
Jeff, can
yes.
I add something on the Suwalki?
Please do.
What Steve said is absolutely true. We know that Lithuania is a very narrow country, meaning when Russia would come from the north, or from the northern part, we have an even more narrow part, which is between Kaliningrad and Belarus, the Suwalki Gap, which could be easily closed, which is the most probable scenario in military thinking, which could happen to Lithuania. And which is why, and also through the Suwalki Gap, there's the train, the logistic goes through, everything has to go through the Suwalki Gap to have the logistic infrastructure also for the troops present in the north of Lithuania. So once the Suwalki Gap would be closed, you would need further logistics to provide everything that what you would need for military operations, which is why, for example, German troop piles of the Sea Battalion, more or less the army part of the Navy, and also the army part of the Air Force. I don't know the word in English, sorry, but their home is in my electoral district. They are object protection, so they are more or less securing when an airplane has to land, and they are building also they're building the grounds and everything of this. So they had an exercise together in Estonia to train how to secure ports, meaning critical infrastructure where you could land also military material. to provide this material for troops which could be deployed, for example, in Estonia, but also in Lithuania. They train together this autumn. It's an open source information, which is why I can easily mention it, because it was also in the public here, in the public information. But this is something that we have to probably do more to train these situations or these scenarios, and how we can then answer to probable shortfalls, for example, infrastructure, or how to provide material. And this is something because you asked me before what I would like to have more, or have it with a stronger focus. I would strongly recommend to train and exercise these kinds of exercises also to do it international, not only with the joint within German troops, but also to do it more internationally and to probable scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that on the Suwałki and the reinforcement. I want to turn to a question from one of our viewers. And the question is this. A major theme of the Madrid NATO summit was shifting NATO's forced posture in the East to deterrence by denial. Not 1 inch was the declared objective when it comes to defending the alliance's eastern frontier. Shouldn't that require, and here's his question, shouldn't that require the full-time deployment of the entire German brigade to Lithuania rather than just its headquarters element? You've touched on this, State Secretary Möller, but I wanted to, since this is more directly formulated, I wanted to come back to it and offer you the opportunity to comment on that.
To start with a short answer, and then I will elaborate a bit on it. At the moment, we don't see a military need for it. And if there would be a military need, we would do so. But at the moment, no military need. Why? If you have a look, for example, how the troop deployment by the Russian forces was in Ukraine, it was more or less from the book. It was how you would study military, how you have military, and how you have military coming to your front. First they had the material, then they had later on troops, then they had also how to provide, then they had logistics, then they all even had, in the end, they had blood transfusion materials. So then, and it took weeks and months until they were ready to have the invasion, the full-fledged invasion to Ukraine. At the moment, we don't see anything of this on the NATO borders, which does not mean that that is 100% unprobable, that it would never happen. But at the moment, we don't see any hint that they prepare something similar to what they did in Ukraine. So far, we have no need to have more soldiers present in Lithuania. But if it would be needed, we would be able to have them with a notice to effect within a couple of days, and then present in Lithuania. You know that Lithuania is not very far away from Germany, so it's if you drive a day, you are in Lithuania. Meaning, if you once this scenario would become more probable, then we can be there within a day. This is something that you have to keep in mind. That is that if invasion would be planned and prepared, meaning a full-fledged invasion with tanks and with troops on the ground, this would also, we would have time to observe and then also time to react, meaning not we have endless time, but we would have hints that they would prepare something. And that would give us time also then to have our troops being deployed to Lithuania to have then the answer. We have troops, more than 1,000 soldiers in Lithuania, meaning it's not nothing, but it's not the 5,000 I know, but they're in a notice to effect within a couple of days, which is, I think within a five days notice to effect, meaning that they have to be able and prepared to be in Lithuania within 5 days. So this is something that we promised, and we have our troops prepared for this. At the moment, there's no imminent, as Stephen said, no imminent scenario on the horizon that Russia's planning a full-fledged invasion to Lithuania. But if we would have any hint, we would be able to react within days.
Okay, thank you. Steve, any additional comment?
Well, I take what State Secretary Muller just said very seriously, and I think she's absolutely right that Germany is making the preparations to be able to move quickly. What I think the Baltic governments, though, fear is that they still remain vulnerable to a potential short notice attack. And while I think that, as I said earlier, I think that's unlikely. There was some wargaming that some of my colleagues at RAND did back in 2014 that showed that, in 2015, that showed that that indeed it didn't focus on Lithuania as much, but certainly that Riga and Tallinn were very vulnerable to a kind of short notice, fait accompli kind of an attack. Whether the Russians would want to launch that in the current context, given the demands that they have on even sustaining their operations in Ukraine, seems, I agree, unlikely. But I think what the Baltic governments are asking for is that they would feel much more assured if there were this larger presence, which that gaming that I alluded to suggested might be preferable, and which indeed the Baltic prime minister has asked for, a combat brigade in each of the three Baltic states, as well as other elements, were able to very quickly come in and reinforce the governments in their efforts in national defense. That would be more a higher level of confidence in their ability to deter, and particularly going forward. But if and the fact that such a movement that the State Secretary was suggesting might not go unimpeded as well. So you'd be talking about not only can you get there on a good day without missiles raining down on your ships and your vehicles, could you get there in a crisis that perhaps Russia might try to generate to test NATO? So again, this is all an area of speculation, but I think what we hear from a number of the Baltic governments, and again, don't mean to be their spokesperson here, but what I think we hear from them, and certainly they make some of the same points to the United States, from what I hear, they'd like this higher level of confidence and over the longer term to be sure that if Russia did at some point, as it reconstitutes over the next several years, decide it was going to test the alliance, that it would have the forces in place that would give them a greater level of confidence in their ability to maintain their sovereignty and territorial integrity, if not 1 inch, as Ian alluded to, certainly without the loss of territory. As I said, Prime Minister Kallas said recently, her assessment was that the current NATO plans would require sacrificing her country's territory and then recovering it after 180 days, which is a very brutal assessment. Of whether that's in fact their worst case or their best case, I don't know, but that's what some Baltic leaders are saying.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a few questions that I'd like to turn to now, and I'm going to try to take them in sort of. There's one that's focused on the current conflict, and then there are a couple of broader questions which we'll come to. The more focused question has to do with munitions, and I think we've all gained a really keen appreciation of the importance of being able to replenish munitions and to be prepared for foreseeable time horizons in employing them. And so the question is there growing coordination perhaps between Germany and its allies, especially Lithuania and the Baltic nations, on producing and acquiring munitions, or do these remain mainly national efforts? State Secretary Möller?
Well, first of all, what we have in Lithuania is fully equipped, meaning we reach everything what NATO asks us to reach, and we have them fully equipped also in terms of ammunition. And then the broader question is if there's a possibility to have not only national and to not only have a national approach towards ammunition, but maybe an international, at least European approach towards ammunition. We have to find out, and we are. I think there's so much talking going on within the European pillar in NATO, but also abroad, how we can have a better equipment and have better situation of ammunition for all of us. So far, what I learned from the industry is that they have the books full. and that they're running a bit out of capacities to produce ammunition. So of course we have to first of all think which is if our systems are interoperable, then the ammunition is of the same type, and then if it is so, how can we put all our efforts together so that we have a European approach within, meaning European pillar of NATO, so that we have then not only one goal, which is more ammunition for all of us, but also to strengthen the European pillar and to strengthen then European security.
Mm-hmm. We have a second question, which is related to Germany's immediate neighbor to the east, Poland. This is a further question from Ian Brzezinski, and it's about the offer that Germany has made to provide Patriot air defense systems to Poland. And his question goes, Germany should be applauded for its offer to deploy its Patriot systems to Poland. What's the status of that offer? And has consideration been given to having German and Polish military personnel jointly man those systems to deepen bilateral capabilities and to use that presence to facilitate integrated air defense operations, Poland, Germany, United States, perhaps, as well as exercises?
After a short period of troubles between the governments and of not knowing if they would accept our offer or not, they accepted, and today we have an investigative team in Poland which started today and arrived Warsaw today to gain information where to position the Patriot batteries, how's this housing situation for our soldiers, how's the procurement, how's the material, all the logistics behind. And we plan to stay in Poland for about 6 months to help to secure Polish airspace and to deploy at about 300 soldiers. It's a bit depending on what Poland will provide as a host nation, but so far we plan with 300 soldiers. How the command structure will be, so how it will be integrated into the Polish military body, we will see. This is now the task of the investigation team to find out how it can be operative on the ground. So this is so far I cannot say how it will be concretely done, but it will be done and then probably will start in January.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from my colleague, Gail Maddox, director of our Foreign and Security Policy Program, about the role of other allies in the enhanced forward presence in Lithuania under Germany's lead. Can you say a little bit about the countries that are playing the most important roles alongside Germany in this enhanced forward presence?
This is a very detailed question. First of all, hello, Gail. Unfortunately, I'm not 100% prepared for this. What I know is that we have about 1,000 soldiers present there. We are very much integrated into this multinational enhanced forward presence group. And we have Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, and Czechia, and Czech Republic being part of this battle group. And there's also, if you have a look, for example, how the other battle groups or the other NATO presences are structured, we always have some countries whom is it much easier to work together, and others whom is a bit more complicated to work together. So what I can say to Lithuania, this is for the German soldiers is very easy. It is also a very good host nation. We have good support from Lithuania. We have infrastructure that is now better prepared, so that also soldiers are housed in a better way than it was before. We have a good environment. We are very much welcomed so far. I can say that what we do there is a story of success, not only for German-Lithuanian cooperation, but also if you have a look on NATO history and how we can work together and also train together, so that in the end we are can operate more effectively than we did before.
Okay. I've got one question which is a bit broader, and I'd like to bring both of you in for your perspectives. This question comes from our non-resident senior fellow Dieter Detke, and it's a question about the article that Steve Flanagan referred to in his earlier comments that is published by Chancellor Scholz in Foreign Affairs last week, and Dieter's question is that whether we should talk about the global aspect of the so-called Zeitenwende a bit more, and is a possible global interpretation of the German Zeitenwende perhaps a new way of enlarging the West beyond NATO and the EU, creating a larger concept of the West, by including other regions of the world and other countries. He mentions in particular Indonesia, India, Australia, New Zealand. So that's a broader question. Maybe Steve, I'll turn to you first for your reaction, and then come back to you, State Secretary.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, I think that the Chancellor's comments were spot on in terms of the thinking of this more globally. First, in the European context, which I alluded to earlier, that there is this opportunity, perhaps a window of opportunity. The U.S. national security strategy, President Biden oftentimes talks about an inflection point that the world has reached. In talking about both not only the and of course, from the U.S. perspective, the greatest and larger challenge to U.S. and global security interests is China, but that Russia is the more immediate concern. And so the whole question about how does the international community and our key allies and partners in the United States, how do we work together to counter both of the challenges that these two competitors pose? And of course, NATO has been beginning to grapple with this question of how does China impact its security, not necessarily militarily most imminently, but through other methods of disinformation, cyber attacks, counter space activities that could damage Western security interests. So NATO, of course, has been moving over the last several summits to begin to talk about the China challenge. And as the State Secretary alluded to, the United States welcomes, I think, has made clear that it would welcome a stronger European effort in defense of European territory, so that the United States, as it rebalances its military forces to the Asia-Pacific region, can continue along that path. And even as Germany and a number of other European allies have made some steps to show they support U.S. efforts to enforce norms and rules of the road and maritime security elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific region. But I don't think that the U.S. expects there to be significant European military deployments out there, although, of course, the French and the British to some extent have some standing presence there. But I think it is I think it is apt, and this also goes well beyond the military dimensions of security. Clearly, as you alluded, Jeff, that it includes aspects of protecting global norms and rules of the road. And also finding ways to work together with some of these adversaries on things where we can't take action without their engagement, for example, on environmental climate change and dealing with environmental risks. So I'll stop there.
State Secretary Möller.
Thank you very much for the question. If we could enlarge the West, we will enlarge NATO with Sweden and Finland, so we will have 2 more members in NATO. And of course, we have a different approach towards neutrality, for example, by Austria, and especially in terms of related to ammunition and production of defense material and weapon systems. We have also an ongoing debate in Switzerland. So this is something very interesting, which nobody expected before, that in those countries there could be a debate, a public debate or even the decision to join NATO after decades of neutrality or bloc-free status. So this is something that, of course, happens with the invasion that Russia and the war crimes Russia commits in Ukraine. If we could enlarge the West, we have to. I think we have to be also honest to ourselves that we have to convince the world, and there are some countries that we can get on our side, especially Indonesia or India, by convincing them that our system and the way we live is the best way that you can have, and that is worth to stand for and to stand on this side. But this there's at the moment there are a couple of countries that are more or less sitting on the fence and observing the situation, who will win in the end. So if Russia will be punishable for what it has committed and what is still committing, that is going on in Ukraine, and if there will be a court judging on the war crimes and also on the whole situation related to the rules-based order, or if in the end Russia will have nothing out of it and will have then violated the rules-based order, and nobody judging them for this unbelievable behavior and the violation of the rules-based order. So this is something that countries observe, and they will decide afterwards, or maybe while they are observing, on which side they stand and which is for them the better side to stand up. So we have to be very clear that the West and democratic countries are not in the majority, even though we had the votes in the United Nations condemning the war that Russia brought to Ukraine. But we have a lot of countries abstaining, and they're observing very closely and very carefully what is happening, and which is for them the better side to be on. And we have to convince them that it's us, and that the way we live is the best way for the people they oversee, and it's the best way for the world, and that we have the rules-based order, which is the basis for the way countries interact. So we have to convince, and then there is the possibility to enlarge the West, which I would conclude is in the end the rules-based order and is democracy, or the way we live. But of course, we have to convince, and we have to also have debates and discussions on the same eye level with those countries and understand what their interests are.
Thank you. And we have one, if I can indulge you for your time for just one more minute, we have one final question, which I think is worth taking, because it's about Ukraine, and it's about how NATO can support global security by taking its part in, as the questioner puts it, restoring the Ukrainian borders. And I think this gets at the question of what the nature of NATO support to Ukraine is. Of course, in Paris, there's a international meeting about supporting Ukraine through assistance and economically and in other ways. But I think this is maybe an opportunity to focus on the military support to Ukraine. Of course, there's been the clear line drawn by NATO not to be directly involved in the conflict, but nevertheless to have a robust and growing level of support militarily to Ukraine in order to defend itself. So I guess the question is, do you see that changing, that red line, State Secretary Möller, and is there room for NATO to do more in supporting Ukraine as it defends itself?
Well, the nature of NATO is a defense alliance for member states. So NATO itself, as for example through the Atlantic Council or whatsoever, doesn't operate in Ukraine. But of course, it's, for example, also the Secretary General of NATO encourages member states to help bilaterally or through, for example, European Union, the military assistance mission, or through the European Peace Facility, which is an instrument to finance military aid for Ukraine to help Ukraine. But NATO itself is at the moment not operative, and I don't see any change in this policy, because in the end, nobody wants NATO becoming an actor in this war, because then we would have World War III, and nobody wants this. So the goal is to help Ukraine, to support Ukraine so that they can defend themselves and throw the Russians out of their country, and at the same time to deter Russia through the activities that NATO does for itself, so that Russia doesn't get more appetite to have a bigger bite of European territory.
Thank you very much. We have used up all of our time, unfortunately, and I would love to continue the discussion, but I think we need to call time here. We are meeting, of course, at a time of ongoing grave challenge to transatlantic security, and as the State Secretary put it, the objective is to defend every inch of NATO territory, including by supporting the most vulnerable, most exposed members of the NATO alliance, including on the eastern flank. And so it's been a great opportunity to hear more detail on what Germany is doing, in particular in Lithuania, as well as in other places on the eastern flank. I want to thank you, Siemtje Möller, Parliamentary State Secretary, for being with us, and Dr. Steve Flanagan from RAND Corporation for being with us as well and sharing your insights. And thanks especially to all of our viewers. We look forward to seeing you again soon, and including perhaps later this week. We have some more things happening before the holidays break sets in. Thanks very much to both of you, and thanks to everybody for watching.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Cheers.